Hello and welcome to another episode of Something Rhymes with Purple with me, Susie Dent, and my brilliant co-host who I can see on a Zoom window, Gyles Brandreth. Hi, Gyles.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. If I was to say to you, lip-smacking, thirst-quenching, ace-tasting, motivating, good, buzzing, cool, talking high, walking fast, living, ever-giving, cool, fizzing, do you know what comes next?
No, I love the way you say it, though. Say it again.
Do you not remember this?
I don't
my
remember
goodness.
it.
This is something I memorised as a child. I'm sure lots of the purple
Well,
people will
you're a
remember
generation younger than me, so I may have missed out on it. Do it again, though, because it was
Okay.
quite fun.
Lip-smacking, thirst-quenching, ace-tasting, motivating, good, buzzing, cool, talking high, walking fast, living, ever-giving, cool, fizzing, Pepsi.
Pepsi.
Pepsi. I even had a silver belt when I was young with all of that written on it.
How fabulous.
With my hot pants. I absolutely loved it. And actually, we're talking about advertising today, so I thought I'd kick off with that.
And I think it's an amusing idea that you're wearing the hot pants to prove to me that you can still get into them. The silver belt is charming too.
They were bright pink, and I'm afraid to say that's
Well,
not exactly
I must say, they're not that any longer. You've clearly washed them on a regular basis. They're looking a little bit pale. But yes, isn't it interesting the way, well, clearly it works. It's in your head.
Totally.
It's still there after all these years. Do you think it made you drink more Pepsi? Did it make you choose Pepsi as opposed to Coke, which I suppose is the other big rival at the time?
Yes, I'm afraid to say it worked. Not forever, because when I was studying in America and would go into breakfast in the college canteen, Diet Coke was actually on tap for breakfast. And I'm afraid that was the beginning of an addiction, genuine addiction that lasted for quite a long time. But a bit like Rishi Sunak, I have now... I've not just restricted myself like Rishi, I have actually stopped. But for a while, it was always Pepsi. And honestly, it was just a brilliant ad.
Well, I like advertising, and I think I really fell in love with it when probably you were still at school. Well, in fact, you were, but maybe you were hardly born. I was at university, and I went to the Soviet Union for the first time during a holiday, one of my holidays. I got a visa and went behind the Iron Curtain, as it was then called, and went to Moscow. And the real thing that struck me most about life behind the Iron Curtain was no advertising. We just take it for granted here. There's colour, there's lights, there's posters, there's everything going on, selling you things. But behind the Iron Curtain in those days, there was no advertising of any kind, no hoardings. And you actually missed it. You missed the vibrancy of it. And of course, that slogan worked. Otherwise, they wouldn't go on doing it. Millions, billions. It's a huge industry, advertising. It's fascinating. And the reason we're talking about it today is you reminded me the other day that some quite distinguished writers started out as copywriters working in advertising agencies. Who was it who came up with the naughty but nice to advertise fresh cream cakes?
That was Salman Rushdie.
Goodness.
So, so that was one of his, which is extraordinary. And you're absolutely right. We were talking about that with hyperbole, weren't we? So we thought we would dedicate an entire episode to advertising. I'm not sure if it's a generational thing, but I look back with real fondness on some of the brilliant ads of my youth. And now if I'm kind of watching stuff on playback or whatever, and then we'll be looking at the ads as well because I'm too mean to pay for no ads, I don't think they're as good. I find them more obvious. And I've got a lot of friends in advertising, so I'm letting them down completely with this. But I just think they've lost their edge a little bit. Maybe it's the TV ads that are just not cutting it for me anyway, but it might just be because I'm getting older.
I think it's to do with nostalgia, because I don't remember advertising from my childhood because my parents didn't think that we middle-class people should have ITV. So when ITV was introduced in 1957 on British television, my parents didn't get it. And in fact, they didn't think they got it until the 1960s. So my recollections, when you're remembering the ads you heard as a little girl, I can remember sitting on the sofa on a Saturday afternoon and Partick Thistle 3, Accrington Stanley 2. That's what, for me, is a sort of echo of childhood. So I think it may be to do with nostalgia. Also, of course, the advertising today isn't necessarily geared at you or me. Somebody who was in the world of advertising explained to me, I said, why are there so many advertisements for cars and for banks on TV? Is it because they're so rich? He said, no, it's because when you decide on your car or your bank, you stick with it for a lifetime. So what these ads are trying to do are to get young people, get them on board, and then, I mean, are you with the same bank you were with 20 years ago? So am I. I'm with the same branch I joined, NatWest, Oxford High Street, 121 High Street, Oxford. I've been with that branch since 1966. People don't change their bank. And they tend not to change their car either. The first sort of proper grown-up car you buy is the car you stick with. So they spend a fortune, because once they've hooked you forever.
Yeah.
So now you being, I'm afraid, what we would call middle-aged, and me being what we would call old, we are not the people they're advertising. And
maybe right. You might be right.
So that's my instinct. How long do you, I mean, I know a little bit about the history of advertising only because I read a book a few years ago called The Shocking History of Advertising, because my family featured in it. But I think they basically concentrated on the 19th century, and I know that's the real birth of modern advertising, but do we know how far back advertising goes and what it was in the early days?
Well, I think it goes back almost to the beginning of civilization. So if you look at the ancient worlds, I mean, the Egyptians actually advertised their wares on papyrus, and the Romans sort of promoted political candidates on coins. Newspapers, I mean, obviously that's much more recently, but they've carried adverts for medicines, including Brandreth's wonderful pills, forever. But I think in terms of the modern advertising age, it was probably Pear's soap in the 1880s, which most people then sort of credit with the first modern print ad. And, it's astonishing just how much it has grown. And also suffered, I think, during the pandemic. There's been a real downturn, inevitably, because people couldn't go on holidays or, they didn't have as much disposable income. But I imagine it will see a resurgence and it will be back to normal before too long.
I admire people in the ad industry. Like you, I've known many. In fact, I was offered a job as a copywriter in America in the 1960s. And I was sorely tempted because, as the man offering me the job explained, what you've got to try to do is create a story, create a drama, create a disturbance. He was very keen on that idea that every advertisement slightly disturbs you. There's something in it that arrests you. And you've got to tell this story, often in 20 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute at most. Bring the whole world. And to try and do that economically, visually, with words and pictures, is quite an art.
Yeah. No, it is an art, and also a very well-paid art, because, the best copywriters are literally millionaires because they have created so much business for the brands that they are so brilliantly promoting.
I bought the house I now live in from a famous advertising man called Peter Marsh, who founded a company eventually called Allen Brady and Marsh. And he was famous for securing the contract to look after British Rail. Do you remember British Rail?
I remember British Rail, of
before
course.
Denationalisation. Anyway, British Rail were looking for a new advertising agency and did this thing of going around different agencies for them to pitch. And they turned up at Allen Brady and Marsh for their appointment, which was 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. And they arrived somewhere, I think it was Charlotte Street in London. And they arrived at the office and they got in, and the receptionist was sitting behind the desk looking very bored, looked up, barely glanced at them, told them to sit and wait. And they sat down, and the reception area was filthy. There was old newspapers and spilt cups of coffee, and it really was ghastly. Anyway, they were waiting there for about 40 minutes. And eventually the man from British Rail got up and said, "I'm afraid we're going to have to leave now." At which point Peter Marsh, who ran the agency, emerged from a back room and said, "Well, now you know what it's like to be a customer of British Rail." And he got the contract as a result of that. So they're clever people. They're canny, crafty people.
Give me some of your favourite or the most memorable adverts for you.
For me, well, oh, Lord, I did like putting a tiger in your tank.
Was this Esso?
Esso wants to make your... Was it?
Yes.
Esso...
We've talked about this before because Esso Blue had the same jingle as Opal Fruits, which were the predecessors of Starburst. So I always used to somehow mix the two up and say Esso Blue made to make your mouth water, which is obviously completely not right. But Tiger in Your Tank, I think there was, what was he called? Tony the Tiger. He was for Cocoa Pops or something.
There you are.
Sugar Puffs or
this
something.
shows me how confused I am. I may get to you if I can see where it is in this room. In the 1970s, 80s, Kellogg's, they used to give away little books, joke books, puzzle books, cartoon books in their packets of Kellogg's cornflakes and Cocoa Pops and all the other things. And I wrote those little books. And I'm in the room at home where I keep all my past triumphs. I think Tony the Tiger was Frosty's.
Ah, okay. Well, that's so interesting, isn't it? Because we remember the ad, but we don't actually remember the brand. I mean, there are several criteria, I think, or at least several strategies, aren't there, to make a successful ad, really. I like the ones that are deliberately sort of understated. So they almost take the mickey out of themselves, which I think is A, very British, and B, very effective. So if you think about Marmite, they say you either love it or hate it. And of course, Marmite has entered the dictionary, meaning something you either love or somebody you either really love or you really can't stand. So that was very clever. And Skoda, Skoda actually, I think, don't they use the chassis of much more expensive models? So effectively, they're the same cars. But because they had a sort of slightly poor person's reputation, their ad was, it's a Skoda, honest. In other words, yes, this wonderful car that you're looking at really is a Skoda. And I think that's really clever.
Economy in the use of words is clearly key.
Yeah, just do it.
Is that Nike?
That's Nike.
Is it pronounced Nike or Nike?
Nike, I think, named after the goddess of victory. So a very clever use of the name. And there's a wonderful word, Nikedonia, which is the anticipation of victory, which is quite a useful word. And yes, that's sort of the sort of taciturnity, if you like. There's also I'm loving it with McDonald's, but with no G, I'm loving it. And that's been really influential grammatically as well, because that tense, I am loving something, really, really took off after the McDonald's ad. So that had a sort of significant impact on the English language, which of course is the holy grail, really.
I was always amazed at the success of Ronald McDonald, because I know a lot of people...
Oh, he's so scary.
Exactly. What is that fear of clowns called, that phobia of clowns?
Oh, yes, that's me, coulrophobia.
Exactly. It's well known that people have a fear of clowns, and there is Ronald McDonald, not looking to me like a terribly appealing clown, looking like a rather sinister figure, and yet they use him, don't they? Extraordinary.
Yes, and actually the charity, which is it called the Ronald McDonald Charity? Anyway, the McDonald's charity is huge. They do a huge amount. So yes, clearly, scary for some, but not for others, and successful, as you say. And it's interesting as well, thinking about Ronald McDonald, the sort of memorable characters that you have. I mean, you and I will remember Milk Tray Man, and all because...
Oh, the lady loves Milk Tray. You couldn't do that now, could you? Because it's bad form. It's rather like...
It could be politically incorrect. It was a kind of such
well,
a
it's politically
James Bond
incorrect on all
character.
sorts of levels. He's
Creeping
swinging into
bedroom.
a person's bedroom without their permission.
Dressed in black.
Dressed in black. He's calling her a lady. How patronising can you get? And he thinks he's got access because she likes chocolates. I mean, please. But
it was clever because it gave that James Bond feel to, let's face it, are usually the cheaper end of the chocolate range.
Oh, okay.
So it was incredibly clever ad.
Speaking of which, I was talking about mummies the other day, those Egyptian mummies.
Oh, yeah.
I was hearing about somebody who'd had their horse stuffed. Taxidermy for their horse because they were so sad to lose it. And I explained that I was planning to get my body stuffed when I die, because my wife has said to me for years, get stuffed. And I thought, well, when I die, I will. And then I can sit in the hallway like a sort of figure. She can put on different jumpers on me every day. And it is done, as you know, there's Jeremy Bentham at UCL in London. Jeremy Bentham, the philosopher. His mummified body is on display at University College London. So you can get stuffed. Anyway, I was mentioning this to somebody, and they said to me, what do you get when you pour nuts and chocolates all over an Egyptian mummy? And the answer is Ferrero Rocher.
Oh.
Anyway, forgive me for that. But there we are. Ferrero Rocher is another.
That's another one.
I can picture the advertisement though of the person coming in holding the pyramid of chocolates.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
what?
I just remember the
Yes.
flake ads as well. Do you remember the flake ads with the girl in a field of poppies and she's got an old-fashioned bite with a basket and she looks like she is in absolute heaven, pretty much having an orgasm essentially through chocolate.
You see, I have to wait for you to say things now that I would no longer dare say. But you're right, sex sells. Let's go through the list
think it
of
was
actually
definitely a sex thing.
what
Yeah.
works. Sex clearly sells. I mean, the put a
Yes.
tiger in your tank from Exxon, was there a kind of boom, boom sexual element, do you think, to that? Or not? Maybe
No,
not.
actually, I don't remember it well enough. I do remember the Diet Coke man, which kind of flipped turned the tables from all these kind of exotically dressed women selling stuff, and this time it was very buff men and sort of women, being quite voyeuristic and watching them down a can of Coke. So that kind of flipped things a little bit. But obviously, as you say, times are changing now. We're much more wholesome now, aren't we? I mean, you think of the anticipation every Christmas of the John Lewis Christmas ad and other supermarkets obviously joining in. But those are little, very creative films in themselves. And, the pressure on them, I guess, to sort of outdo themselves every single year must be immense.
And
But
what
we
they're
do-
trying to do there is be cosy, sentimental, nostalgic, as you say, wholesome.
Warm.
So it's interesting. Sex sells, but wholesome sells as well. It's
probably
curious.
more now, I would say. I think we've come a long way from the flake ads now. But yeah, it is interesting. I mean, we're going back to the memorable characters, which I think is a really key and very successful way of creating a memorable ad. Do you remember he's still around, Alexander the Meerkat? CompareTheMeerkat.com.
Now, you see, I have no idea what CompareTheMeerkat.com product is. I have no idea at all. But Alexander the Meerkat, I adore.
Yeah.
And in fact, when with TV programs, we usually watch them pre-recorded. We fast forward through the ads until we see the meerkat, in which case my wife says, stop, and we have to watch the meerkat. We have fallen in love with the characters.
CompareTheMeerkat.com. You say you love the ads. Can you remember the single word that actually then was suddenly on everyone's lips? It became a kind of staple of slang as a result of those ads.
Give me a clue.
It's the kind of the sign off.
Simples.
Simples, exactly.
Simples. Indeed.
Simples. Was suddenly everywhere in teen slang, all because of the impact of the ad.
Oh, it's amazing.
It is amazing, isn't it?
And I know him because he's a DJ, the man in the Go Compare opera singer. He's actually an opera singer.
Yes.
He's also a Welsh DJ, and I've met him. He's a delightful fellow. But that obviously is hugely successful.
Yeah.
I mean, the ads to me seem totally inane, even though I know and like the fellow. So there's no
But
accounting
again, I
for
think
what
that's
works.
the success. I think it's taking the mickey out of itself. And I think that is really successful. Don't take yourself too seriously. Make people laugh by doing something really, as you say, inane, and it will stick in the memory. And another good way that we haven't really mentioned is, I suppose simples comes into this category because it didn't exist before, but playing around with words, because I think if you have a linguistic impact, then you also have quite an impact on people's memories. So one of the really clever political campaigns, if you remember, was the Saatchi and Saatchi 1978 ad that was aimed against Callaghan's government, and it was Labour isn't working, with a whole queue of unemployed, basically, which I think was incredibly effective. Do you remember that?
Of course
you
I
were
remember
probably
it.
in politics then, were you?
I was. And
Yeah.
indeed, at the time, I knew Maurice Saatchi at the time that they were working on that. And it was credited with really making the difference at the election. I mean, ads would not go on. They would not be the multi-billion-pound industry if they didn't work. But as an ad man once said to me, we don't know what will work and what won't work until we do it. But I
Yeah.
can't see a can of baked beans without thinking beans means Heinz.
Very clever. More wordplay. Actually, while we're on these slogans, I'm going to test you on some, and I'm going to just leave a gap for the product. I think you'll know quite a lot of them actually. A day helps you work, rest, and play.
A Mars bar day. And I believed it. And I think now they have to change the ad because it's not technically 100%
Healthy.
correct. Because, but they were only advocating one. I used to love that.
No,
Have you ever
me
had a
too.
deep fried Mars bar?
No, I've never gone for that. I have had this product, however, that you'll know this one as well. One of the most successful ones goes right back to the 1930s. We are the happy girls and boys.
I was going to say, we are the Ovaltinis.
Exactly. Ovaltine, the warm malt drink.
It's
that
before
helps
my
you
time,
sleep.
but it was big in the 1930s and 1940s,
It
wasn't
was.
it? And
It
there,
was.
it was the melody that made it successful.
Absolutely. Here's one that you won't know because it's way before your time. The slogan was simply, even your closest friends won't tell you.
Oh, it's a deodorant one.
It's not, but you're close.
Oh, bad breath.
Yeah,
It's for bad
Listerine.
breath. Listerine. Things that are before my time are the things I do know. Things that are of my time I know nothing about at all.
Okay. Do you want some more?
Yeah, please. I'm loving it.
Okay. It's the real thing.
Coke? Coca-Cola? Yes, you've
Yes.
got to get the authentic. Don't
It's the
say-
real thing.
Oh,
Yep. Refreshes the parts other beers cannot reach.
I was going to say opal fruits again. Heineken.
Heineken.
Shows you how effective these things are. I want to explain to our listeners that we've not cheated. I did not know that these were going to be thrown our way. And are you remembering them too? I wonder if you're listening. Anyway, go on.
So we also have hello Tosh.
Hello, Tosh.
this?
Got a... Don't know that at all.
Hello Tosh. Got a Toshiba? Do you remember
Hello,
that
Tosh. Got a Toshiba? No.
one? No, you don't remember that.
I
Okay.
don't remember that one.
This one you'll definitely know. Vorsprung durch Technik.
Ah, yes. Is that for... You see, I'm not sure. I think it's for BMW.
No, Audi.
But there you are. I knew
Still
it was
German.
a car. But how interesting. I think what happened to me is I fall in love with the advertisement. And it's
Yes.
working subliminally. I mean, I mentioned beans,
Yes.
Heinz. The point is, I go into the supermarket and I see 2 cans of beans, and the Heinz ones are more expensive. The ones next door are probably made by Heinz, but put in a different can. But I still go for the more expensive one because I recognise the label. It's very bizarre the way
okay.
it works, isn't it?
Also, I have to say, full disclosure here, I have the most brilliant friend in advertising, Peter Suter, who used to run one of the big ad agencies. And he was involved with possibly my all-time favourite campaign because it was just so clever. And that was The Economist. Those bright red billboards with a single white strapline on them. One of their best was free enterprise with every issue. But they were just so clever in many ways.
Well,
There was
that's
also one
part
which had
of
a-
it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the ad man that I used to talk to a lot, he used to say that one of the keys of a good advertisement is to be disruptive, so that it slightly throws you. It's not just, I mean, obviously there are tricks that we've been talking about, using a few words, being personal, intimate, you know. Do you remember the famous Lord Kitchener poster, "Your country needs you, involving you," having a catchy jingle, creating these memorable characters, playing with words. But at the same time, there must be something that hooks you and keeps you there. Give me one more, and then I want to ask about the TV series Mad Men.
Well, one of the ones that, just to touch on language again, because obviously that's what we're all about. If a slogan passes into general use, that's surely the ultimate goal of the advertiser. So one wood preservative manufacturer, and you'll probably remember, has seen it does exactly what it says on the tin, enter as a kind of, a sort of general idiom in English. Do you remember the brand?
Now, I would have thought that the phrase was picked up by the manufacturer rather than the other way around. But you're telling me the
No.
manufacturer came up with a slogan and now we all use it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Goodness.
And that was Ron Seal.
Ron Seal.
Also, Vavavoom.
Vavavoom. We've got plenty of vavavoom. I love the phrase. But
Know the
what?
brand?
No.
Renault.
Renault.
As I say, I think language is so key because you've only got, as you've said, a very short amount of time. Or if it's a print ad, obviously you've just got a few seconds for people to read it. There was also 5 o'clock shadow. That's another one. 5 o'clock shadow is a really, really old ad for gem blades in America, and it says goodbye 5 o'clock shadow. It's actually around that time. It is quite extraordinary. You would find ads positively recommending the health benefits of cigarettes and that kind of thing. If you have a cough, smoke I can't remember what it was. Not a cough in a carload was something for Old Gold cigarettes, I think. I'd walk a mile for a camel. You're never alone with a strand. Happiness is a cigar called Hamlet. Remember that one?
I do remember. I can hear the music as well. Winston tastes good, like a cigarette should. And people used to lend their names to cigarette companies. The actor Gerald Dumouriez, they were Dumouriez cigarettes. The actor Laurence Olivier, they were Olivier cigarettes. And these are things that actually kill people.
I
Extraordinary.
know, it's extraordinary. Oh, here we go. For your throat's sake, smoke Craven A's for Craven A cigarettes.
My father smoked Craven and loved
really?
them.
I've never
Red
heard
boxes
of
with a
them.
black cat. Oh, he loved them. They killed him, but he loved them. Now, these ads that you're talking about of the smoking variety featured very much in an extraordinary TV series called Mad Men, which was set in the 1950s, 1960s. Everybody smoked in it, and I found it completely gripping. But I wondered about some of the phrases in there that maybe you can unwrap for me, even if you didn't see the series. Why were they called Mad Men, do you know?
I think, I haven't seen this yet, so I'm looking forward to it. But I think that actually it was to do with the fact that they were on Madison Avenue. So they were the men on Madison Avenue. I think that was the idea. And of course, then it absolutely suited by the sounds of it, suited the plot line. But it does sound brilliant. I know I've missed a trick by not watching it.
Madison Avenue in New York is like Fleet Street was in London. Fleet Street is the street of newspapers. Madison Avenue is the street of advertising people. This is reminding me how very parochial we are being with all these ads. Purple people around the world, send us the slogans that you think have been the most effective, and maybe tell us why, particularly ones involving words and language, you think they've worked effectively. It isn't always words that does it. I think of the lovely Hovis ads. It's entirely the music and the picture of the boy climbing the hill that made those ads work.
There's a nostalgia there, absolutely.
Back to Mad Men. Lots of talk of copy and copywriters. Where does that come from?
Yes, advertising copy. I mean, it's literally is just sort of for text. But I mean, you're right to mention the kind of tribal jargon of advertising. We haven't actually also mentioned advert itself, which comes from the Latin ad, meaning towards, and vertere, to turn, because an advert makes you turn your attention towards it. Or as one Canadian humorist put it, advertising may be the science of arresting human intelligence long enough to get money from it. But back to the tribal language. I mean, the kind of account men and women are called suits, or sometimes bag carriers. Their awards are pencils.
An award, if you win a prize?
If you get an award, you've got a pencil.
Oh.
You have subliminal advertising. Obviously, that's the kind that consumer doesn't even know they're absorbing. So that's product placement. But it's also, I think, as good as, the smell of fresh bread when you enter a supermarket, which takes you straight to the bread aisle, or the little baskets at the front, which have got freshly baked hot cross buns on them. You have a bastard, which is an awkward print ad size, or it could alternatively be a client, possibly.
Oh, you mean, yes, you open the newspaper and the advertisement is a funny shape. It goes across 2 pages. And is that what a bastard is? So
Absolutely
it's quite
right.
difficult to design. That's why it's called a bastard.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Where does the word slogan, where does that come from?
Yeah, slogan is a really interesting one. It's very, very old. So it actually, you don't know how it began.
No.
No, it actually was a Slughorn, believe it or not, and it was a war cry. If you look back to, say, the Battle of Flodden, where the English army defeated the invading Scots army, so that was King James IV, they had a Slughorn. It's a Gaelic word meaning the cry of the host. So it was a war cry used by Scottish Highlanders and Borderers in their battles against the English. So it was very much part of the kind of skirmish. And the slogan cry eventually left its roots, but it kept that sort of sense of the distinctive note, phrase or cry of a certain body of people. And then, of course, of the distinctive note of a brand. So it's come such a long way.
But it's still, I can see why it's called a slogan. It's brilliant. Give me any more from the lingo of the ad men.
You have Greek, which is fake copy used just to show, the space that the real copy will occupy. So
as in it's all Greek
in
to me. I mean, it's just,
Yes, that goes back to Shakespeare, that one. You have a tissue. Now, a tissue meeting is an early one with a potential client at which you kind of float ideas, but they might be instantly disposable. You might just say, yeah, great idea, but that's not going to work. Then you have the brief, obviously, which is the document from the client explaining what's required. I mean, you and I have had briefs in our time. They're usually anything but brief.
Have you made any ads yourself, TV ads?
Very weirdly, I remember telling this story on 8 out of 10 Cats. I was asked when I lived in Germany to provide a word for a German ad, a chocolate ad. And I thought, well, obviously I'm going to be saying something British, which is, going to be sophisticated and add a bit of exoticism. And do you know what I had to say?
Tell me.
That wasn't even, they didn't need an English speaker to do that. It was just, That was it.
But I think the way you're doing it in English does sound quite English.
Do you? I don't know
Yes.
what the German equivalent of would be. Anyway, it's probably time that we got to our lovely emails from the Purple people.
Well, look, before we do, Purple people, if you know about advertising in your part of the world, do please feel free to share your favourite advertising slogans with us, and we can then chat about those. Who's been in touch with us this week?
Yes, we have had an email from Marius in Germany. Now, Marius has a surname which is going to make me sound very drunk when I try to pronounce it, but I'm going to give it a go. Mishushinsky. Sorry, Marius, I probably completely mangled that. But anyway, they have asked about apparent connection in different languages between the number 8 and the word night, because obviously 8 and night share the same letters apart from the first. And what Marius has noticed, and many others have before, is that it's the same in different languages. So acht in German is Nacht, then you have huit for 8 in French, and then nuit. You have ocho and noche, you have otto and notte. And so it goes on.
That's amazing.
I know,
it's quite
it's
amazing. So 8 in English gives you the word night. Acht is 8 in German. Add an N, it becomes Nacht, which means night. Huit, H-U-I-T in French. Take off the H, replace it with N, becomes nuit. This is completely extraordinary. Otto, what language is that?
Otto notte, that's Italian.
Oh, extraordinary. Now, what's the reason for this?
Yes, well, do you know what? It is entirely, well, I say entirely coincidence. It's a coincidence in that they weren't intended to have a link, but they go back to very ancient and very similar roots in what's called Proto-Indo-European, which is a kind of reconstructed language that was the sort of progenitor, if you like, of many, many of the modern languages we have today. But because they were very similar roots, they actually then progressed in sound in kind of parallel lines, because sound patterns tend to sort of follow the same, they evolve in the same way throughout the languages. So these sounds remained very, very close together all the way through, which is why there is this sound similarity. But as far as we can tell, it is a complete coincidence.
That's extraordinary.
I know, it is, isn't it? It's really interesting. It kind of makes you go, ooh.
Thank you, Marius, for sharing that. Now, you found that surname a bit challenging. I find this surname full of nostalgia, because I knew the great uncle of the person who's written to us. Susan Bramble has written to us from County Wicklow in Ireland. Hello, Gyles and Susie. My great uncle played the part of Steptoe Senior in the old TV show, Steptoe and Son. And when I was young, we watched it, vaguely mystified at the dialect they used, as we hadn't heard it before in Dublin. One word they use, which we still use, is clobber for clothes. Any idea where clobber came from? For our international listeners, Steptoe and Son was a brilliant television series written by a double act called Galton and Simpson. They famously in the 1950s wrote for Tony Hancock. He didn't want them to write anymore, so they went on to write for Harry H. Corbett and Wilfred Bramble this amazing series about a rag and bone man and his son called Steptoe and Son. Clobber. Where does clobber come from?
Well, I have to disappoint, because the answer is we just don't know. It goes back to the late 19th century. We know it's not related to the clobber that, again, very British, means to hit someone hard. If you clobber someone over the head, or you might defeat them completely by clobbering another football team. That dates from the Second World War and seems to have been RAF slang for striking a place hard in a bombing raid. But again, we don't know where either of those come from. I mean, I would guess that there's something about the sort of sound symbolism for hitting someone if you clobber them, because you can make that sound quite funky. But I'm not sure about clobber for clothes. Maybe a Romany origin, who knows? But I'm sorry to let Susan down, but, you know, the search will go on.
If you think you have a better answer, please get in touch. It's purple@somethingelse.com. Now, Susie, I want 3 wonderful words for you this week. Somebody stopped me in the street. Now, we're allowed to be stopped in the street. They still kept their distance and said they love your words, and they quite like the Scrabble words I mentioned the other day. Did I have another one for them? And I did. I offered the word CAZ, C-A-Z, which is short for casual. I don't know if it's allowed in your dictionary, but in the Scrabble world, we allow C-A-Z. Can be a very useful Scrabble word. You've got words with a deeper, heritage. What are you going to offer us?
Yes, well, I just thought this one is quite appropriate for springtime. And I might have mentioned it at the beginning of lockdown, when I felt that this is what we were all doing for ourselves, and that is nidificating.
Ooh.
To nidificate is to make a nest, something that the birds are doing very much at the moment, but something that I felt we were all retreating into, as I say, last year. But it's a lovely word, nidificate.
And the nid, N-I-D, is as in the French word for nest, isn't it?
Exactly. Yep. Or to the Latin nidus, that it followed the same route, nidificate. This one, I just think it's very useful, very pithy, and describes so many situations. You might say that our current exit out of lockdown, it is contingent entirely on all of us obeying the rules, and it is filipendulous. Filipendulous means hanging by a thread.
Oh, I like it.
Filipendulous. You might say, again, the outcome of a football match in extra time is filipendulous. And finally, a word that I absolutely love the sound of, and it means to melt away or gradually dissolve. So your fears might hopefully eventually do this, and that is deliquesce. Deliquesce, which I think is beautiful. Have you got a poem for us?
I've got a poem for us. And if you're listening to this for the first time, it'll be around the 14th of April. If you're listening to us in the future, well, we were recording this around the 14th of April. And the 14th of April is the feast of St. Bertius, Tiburtius, who is the patron saint of cuckoos. The 14th of April is known as Cuckoo Day, and you were mentioning spring being in the air, and that word including nid, what's that again? Say it, nid?
Nidificate.
Nidificate. So inspired by that, here's a poem by W.H. Davies, who was an extraordinary writer and lived for many years as a homeless person. And here he is celebrating the unique call that gives the cuckoo its name. The woods and banks of England now, late coppered with dead leaves and old, have made the early violets grow and bulge with knots of primrose gold. Hear how the blackbird flutes away, whose music scorns to sleep at night. Hear how the cuckoo shouts all day for echoes to the world's delight. Hello, you imp of wonder, you. Where are you now, cuckoo? Cuckoo.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is lovely. Well, I think that is our lot. We are really grateful for all the reviews that you leave us, and also the emails, of course. And we read every single one. So thank you for those. If you would like to get in touch, you can email purple@somethingelse.com. And Something Rhymes with Purple is, of course, a Something Else production. It was produced by Lawrence Bassett with additional production from Harriet Wells, Steve Ackerman, Ella McLeod, Jay Beale, and the person that, well, those who very kindly attended our live show recently finally got to see in all his glory.
Golly. Cuckoo.